It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Dr. Sean Gallagher of Northeastern University. Sean is known around the world for bringing ideas on how higher education can innovate to make learning much more meaningful and more accessible to students, and also how these changes will benefit employers looking for highly trained workers. The subject of the panel discussion will be on how changes brought about by the pandemic may bring some creative paradigm shifts in the way life sciences education looks going forward. After the panel discussion today, we'll have a Q&A session. During the discussion or during the Q&A, please use the chat feature to submit your questions to Questions for Panel. That will actually be me, but I will collate all the questions and then present them to the panelists during the Q&A session. Afterwards, we will be meeting in small breakout rooms for more in-depth conversation, and then after that, returning to the full meeting room to share our insights with each other. So Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Carla. It's a real privilege to be involved in this event. So happy that we could do it virtually in these challenging times. My research focuses on the intersection of work and learning pretty generally across sectors, but certainly life sciences is at the core of the type of solutions that we need for the future. And I'm excited to moderate the discussion. Really going to just dive right in and turn it over to our esteemed panelists. I'm going to just ask them to introduce themselves one by one. We have Jared Auclair from Northeastern University, Robert Liu from Harvard University, Catherine Spilios from Boston University, and Sunny Tam from Framingham State University. Again, they all have very accomplished records and titles, so we'll just ask them to introduce a little bit about themselves and go in that order, if we don't mind. So Jared, do you want to start off first?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. And thanks, everyone, for the invitation to participate in the panel, and good afternoon to all of you who are joining us virtually. I'm Jared Auclair. I'm the director of the master's program in biotechnology, the master's program in bioinformatics, the director of the Biopharmaceutical Analysis Training Lab, which is the home to our internationally recognized centers of excellence in biotherapeutics, advanced cell therapies, and medical devices, as well as a partner with the International Council for Harmonization and Training and the World Health Organization. And I'm also I'm an analytical chemist and molecular and cell biologist and an associate teaching professor in the chemistry department. Thanks, Sean.
Excellent. Robert, I believe you're next.
Yes, thanks, Sean, and thanks, Mass Bioed, for convening this. I think it's a fantastic gathering. So I'm Rob Liu. I'm a professor of molecular and cellular biology at Harvard. But I was the founding faculty director of Harvard X, and I've been involved very much in online learning for some time. And I'm also leading what I think is the next evolutionary step in online learning platforms called Lab Exchange. And so this is sort of an exciting moment, as we all know, to really look at how online learning can change and evolve over time. And so I'm really interested in hearing what everyone has to say and in the discussion that will follow.
Great, thank you. And Catherine.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this fantastic conversation so far. I am an entomologist by training, but I stepped away from that side of my research well over a decade ago to focus on education. I am the director of instructional labs in biology at Boston University. I'm also the director of the Learning Assistant Program, as well as the chair of the National Learning Assistant Alliance Leadership Council. And I'm also a senior lecturer at Boston University within biology.
Thanks, Catherine. And last but not least, Sunny.
Oh, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sunny Tam. I'm currently the director of graduate education in biotechnology at Framingham State. Also recently started to manage the continuing education's undergraduate programs at Framingham State. Before Framingham State, I have been working in the industry, the biotech area, for about 20 years or so.
Okay, well, thank you all. So our focus here is on what everyone's well aware of, the shift to remote and online learning. There's probably been no more significant topic and activity in the world of higher education. And it's great to be able to share some lessons learned and some best practices from that. And also, of course, we're thinking about the future. We're thinking about a world that is more fluid and more uncertain. We're going to have online We're going to have continued classroom and lab instruction. Things may need to stop and start. So where I want to begin is just by asking, as we brought classes online in a really quick kind of emergency format this spring, were there things that worked well? And also, what could have been improved? Lessons learned from that experience. Sunny, do you maybe want to comment on that one first?
Yes, definitely. I mean, for my programs, which already in the hybrid mode, so going online, it is seamless. And many of my faculty are well-versed, use Blackboard and really interacting with the students at the graduate level. But some of my colleagues at the undergraduate divisions seems to have more problems because traditionally undergraduate courses, many of them are taught face-to-face. So they have actually hours, okay? Some of them have to say, okay, you have to switch to online, remote learning. So there has been a challenge, but I mean, all the faculty is pretty resilient and they adapt. I think the key thing here for this new climate is the versatility, flexibility that both the teacher and the student have to exhibit. And there are tools actually out there, but ultimately, I mean, it speaks to the heart and soul of educators. How much do you want to help the students? How much you want to actually to make them to be successful? And likewise, the students, how flexible they are in terms of continue to learn, but given the resources we have. So is this type of teacher to student relationships that is being tested. But I mean, after the spring semester, now we're going to the summer sessions, and I see a lot of changes in terms of the teacher that traditionally would be against online education. Now they are start to make some more sense. So we are all learning, okay? Doesn't matter how old you are, it is a part of the learning process. Actually, I am also humble of, I mean, being educated right now because of the situation. So we're all in together. And the key thing is the morality in terms of like how much we want we have a great society and also a great educational system. Yeah.
Excellent. And Catherine, I think you have some particular viewpoints and experiences on this, given your focus at BU.
Sure. So thank you for your comment, Sunny. I completely agree with everything that you just said. At BU, we had about 72 hours from the announcement that we are moving online to when we had to be online. So once we all recovered from that whiplash, you know, we just had to hit the ground running. And I think what everybody learned very quickly, and this plays off of what Sunny was saying as well, what everybody learned really quickly is that interacting with and engaging students in a remote environment is it's just fundamentally different from an in-person environment. Yeah. And I think us as instructors, we very quickly learned that we rely on the feedback that we get from our class in real time. Mm-hmm. And in the absence of that feedback in a remote situation, it necessitated us to come up with creative ways to engage and interact with our students. And I think that's one of the ongoing challenges that we all face, is recognizing how we can restructure our curriculum so that we can encourage engagement of our students when they might not be in a mindset to be able to pay attention for 50 minutes online. You know, we have to recognize and understand their challenges and then adjust our instructional modalities to best match that. So that definitely was and is, I think, one of our biggest lessons learned. The other thing that we've definitely taken a big step back and looked at our curriculum overall, and we've started to break down our learning outcomes, and we've really found that they fit into 3 broad categories. Content. Of course, we want the students to learn the material. The soft skills, things like critical thinking, understanding the nature of science, teamwork, those skills that can come out of instruction, and then technical skills. Now, these technical skills in person are taught within an instructional lab setting. In a remote environment, conferring those skills is next to impossible without some very creative ways. And so then we really had to step back and say, okay, well, why are we teaching the skills that we are teaching? You know, does it necessitate a student needs to learn to pipette from here to here? Or do they need to understand the theory and the concepts behind the biotech techniques that we are using? So we've really taken a deep dive into what we are teaching, why we are teaching it, and how we are teaching. And of course, all of those pieces inform us as we start to think about the fall semester, which is not that far away.
Right, thank you. And so as we look to the fall, are there ways that you all are designing intentionally for more blending of learning or being able to cycle from classroom to lab to online format? Jared, Rob, others, perspectives on that? How do we do this more intentionally and really plan versus just in a less coordinated way?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sean. And I think like everybody else, we went online very rapidly, and both the instructors and the students had to adjust. I would be lying to you if one of the biggest challenges that we saw with that transition was changing the students' mindsets and helping them ease into that. I saw a huge increase in cheating, right? For example, when we transitioned to online, which then gave both the students and the faculty a bad experience. And I want to make sure that we hedge that, because I think that we're moving in the right direction, but I don't want to step backwards, which is something that Rob and I talked about last time we spoke. But I think coming up in the fall, right, the one thing that we're doing and that I'm really promoting for all of my faculty, and we have a unique challenge because 95% of my faculty are adjuncts who work full-time jobs and then come teach for me at night, right? So when it's especially challenging when we instantaneously go online for them, because they obviously have another job. So one thing that I'm promoting is a more sort of the same thing that Catherine was saying: take a step back, think about your course, but also let's design everything so that it can be delivered online, such that we can go back and forth. And my anticipation actually for the fall would be, we're on ground, but some people might be quarantined or not able to join us in the classroom for travel restriction reasons or what have you. And we'll have to execute that learning both on ground and online simultaneously, essentially. So we want to ensure that all those resources are built. So for example, I'm suggesting our faculty take, as a core foundation, online courses that have been developed for online delivery, which is something that we do within the university, and using those as the foundation for their in-ground courses. And I think it also lends very nicely to flipping the classroom, which is something I'm a huge proponent of moving forward.
Great. Rob, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, one thing that we've found really interesting about all this is, as I think Catherine mentioned, the opportunity to really reassess what you're doing in the course. What are your primary objectives and what's the best way of achieving them? And I think what we're heading towards is a place now where, instead of thinking about, well, here's how we teach online and here's how we teach in person, to maybe step back from both of those modalities and think about, how do we use self-paced and asynchronous materials, many of which can now be digital in very interactive ways? And how do we think about synchronous or live interactions with our students that sometimes might be in the classroom, but based on what's going on or the format of the course, might also be live online? And so I think one of the advantages of thinking about this sort of in general is the possibility of creating a curriculum that's resilient, so that if due to a spike, heaven forbid, in cases of COVID-19, one would need to switch very rapidly from in-person to online or mix them up in some way, you can do that really seamlessly and turn on a dime. So this is an opportunity to really think about synchronous, asynchronous, what we do in those two domains, but I think as importantly, how do they support and interact with each other? And then we'll do them either entirely online or blended sort of online and in person.
Great. And what about some of the technologies that you're using specifically in terms of virtual training and assessments? And is there any particular tech or tools? I think you've developed sort of more of a website framework, but could you talk a little bit about that?
No, of course. I mean, I think one of the challenges we face right now is that understandably, folks think that online learning is one thing. So that given the quick pivot that happened this spring, when people were not really ready for this change, if students and instructors are feeling sort of unhappy, the risk is that we say, well, online learning's a disaster. Let's just forget about the whole thing. When in fact, in the same way that you can have excellent in-class teaching and terrible in-class teaching, the same is true of online. So I think now is a perfect moment to remind ourselves that in fact, in the last 5 to 10 years, there have been major revolutions in what's happening online and in terms of what platforms can support. Modes of interactivity, ways in which we understand that you intermix, for example, video and reading with formative assessment into pathways that are much more varied for learners, ways in which learners can interact with materials, in terms of their own kinds of annotation, etc., that changes how they really interact with materials. But I think, quite frankly, we're in a golden age now of beginning to understand how the online courses that we're accustomed to, like MOOCs, for example, etc., that's the model of yesterday. That what we're moving to today is something that is not only more interactive, but something that is much more adaptive, much more personalizable for students. So for example, the Harvard project that I lead, Lab Exchange, we're focused on taking the experience of a MOOC and basically unbundling all of that and putting it in the hands of the instructor and the learner, the ability to pick what they need, rearrange it, and tell new adaptive narratives that are designed to meet the needs of their students where they are. So that in some ways what we've done is, we often think of online learning as big institutions running the show, creating a course, we broadcast that course to you. We're now in an age where we can put the instructor and indeed the learner in the driver's seat, right? So I think at a platform level, there's a revolution that's happening right now that couldn't be more timely. And then as we heard from Catherine and others, lab virtualization is entering a new age, in part really based on that reassessment of what we want students to get out of a lab. It's not just simply holding something, right, and understanding how this thing works. It's about how do you design an experiment? How do you troubleshoot? How do you analyze the data? How do you place experiments in a sequence to answer a larger question? And sort of the digital environment pulled from online courses and frankly, things like gaming present us with entirely new opportunities that when we're able to get into labs will transform how ready our students are. And when we can't go into labs, significant learning and skills development will nevertheless sort of continue. And I dare say will probably exceed what we often see in the traditional labs that we do. And as someone that does that, I'm more than happy to say that. Right.
That's maybe one of the more interesting things here is the sort of technology augmented learning in person and online. A lot of interest, hype, but also reality related to virtual reality, augmented reality, AR and VR. Let's stay on that topic maybe for a little bit here and hear from each of you. Jared, thoughts on AR, VR? Are you using it today? What's the real promise for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things in the AR, VR space to think about. One thing I would say is, as a trained scientist, one of my mentors always told me that, I didn't always have to use the most expensive machine, in my case, a mass spectrometer, to answer my question. So sometimes we don't need to hit a nail on the head with a sledgehammer when we can use just a regular hammer, right? That said, that meaning clearly that, AR, VR isn't always the answer, but something that we can use. We are currently exploring ways to use it. I think there's a couple of different things that we're looking at in the AR, VR space. One of them is sort of you can hear my kids in the background, sorry. The AR VR space is sort of wearing your cell phone on your forehead, or a sort of a GoPro approach where, you know, the instructor in a lab is doing the experiment in real time. The students are watching in a platform like Zoom and interacting in the field of vision of the instructor, right? That's something pretty simple that we can do, and we're pursuing aggressively. You know, the other thing that we can think about in the ARV, and in that example, you know, only the instructor has to be wearing, you know, a mixed reality headset. And the alternative example, which is it's probably a little further down the road, is you know, developing 3D labs in AR VR space that students can interact with and really learn things from. You know, I think that there's a lot that can be done in that fashion. I would say that I don't think that it can fully replace hands-on lab training. I think that's an important part of our educational pedagogy for biotech, but we can do a lot of things to at least reduce the amount of time we're spending on simple things in the lab, like pipetting or doing solutions and dilutions. One thing I would also add is that AR and VR is in its infancy in general, but definitely in the education space. I don't think that in the education space there's been very much input from educators on how that can be used. And one thing that my friends know and probably are tired of me saying is, you know, if a company is training, then higher education is missing an opportunity or doing something wrong and not preparing our students properly. That keeping in mind that, you know, I wasn't trained as a teacher, but of many years of experience now, and there's some nuance to being a good teacher. Like Rob said, sometimes we have good classroom teachers or bad ones. Same thing with online. So, you know, we really focus on how we can do that most effectively. So adding our expertise to the AR VR space to develop it for education is something that's crucially needed and important. And I think it's a technology that will supplement lots of the other things that we're doing. And I think, you know, Rob's Lab Exchange is a great example of where things are going, and I encourage you all to look at it. I don't work for him, by the way, but I think it's a great platform. And I think, you know, that augmented with some AR, VR in the future and other traditional types of online pedagogies that are already well established, I think it'll make for a very powerful toolkit that we're able to use to enhance our students' experience. And I'd also add that it's a great tool for not only education, traditional education, but capacity building, workforce development. I'm also a huge proponent of K-12 education, like the Secretary was talking about, and there could be a role where that gets played in there also, and we can touch more people and really use it as a tool to excite people about what's possible in the sciences.
Great. Let's circle over to Catherine and Sunny on the same theme, if you want to offer some perspectives on, are there things you're doing today with it? Where do you see it moving, to the extent that it's a major opportunity?
I think it is absolutely an open opportunity. I think it, as Jared just said, it's sort of this, you know, the wave of the future with endless bounds. I mean, speaking personally from where I am, we are exploring opportunities that are out there. And so, yeah, I love the summary that Jared just presented.
Great. Anything to add, Sunny?
Yeah, I mean, well, think about the pain some of our colleagues have to go through for the online education. But when we are in the near future that we can actually get back to the new normal, okay, we're going to have some amazing tools that will help our teaching, help our students. I mean, at some point we are approaching more like education without borders. I mean, the same curriculum can be taught to students out of state, out of this country, everywhere in the world. I mean, that's the kind of power that online education could have. Although hardware is important, okay, I do know some students that don't have the internet bandwidth. Even while I teach, sometimes my internet go down. So those are some of the hardware issues that easily can be fixed. But on the other hand, using this online medium, there are many things we can do. I like to spend a couple of minutes before class and just video chat with my students, okay? Create this personal bonding and make it more like a face-to-face. That also helps. I do understand for life science, a lot of laboratory works here. It cannot be replaced by actual laboratory presence, but now we also have like VPN. I mean, you could actually operate a mass spec, okay, from your home. I mean, think about that, okay? Maybe things we cannot do in a lab, like lighting up a Bunsen burner, but we can focus on other things, more the analytics and data crunching. There are a lot of things we can still teach, okay, in a laboratory environment. So we just need to be flexible and be creative in a way. But still, the key thing is this personal bond between teacher and students are very important. And I think Jared mentioned about cheating. To me, it's like grading is secondary. I actually allow some of my students to do some grading. So actually, they learn from each other, okay? So they won't come to me because they have a bad grade. I would tell them, well, go talk to your classmates, okay? Because they did not give you a good grade. So there are many ways we can actually turn the table around in this crisis here. But it's, again, it's a learning experience for everyone here.
Thanks. And what about some of the obstacles? I mean, you mentioned bandwidth, but if we think more broadly about any sort of obstacle, whether it's faculty, technology, infrastructure, access, maybe you need certain types of systems or backgrounds to find yourself in a mode where this is easy. Would anyone like to comment on those sorts of issues, and what have you found in this transition, and what do you think going forward? Maybe Rob, if I call on you, and I know you're doing some of the innovative things there.
Of course. So, I mean, one of the things we've dealt with this spring, and I've dealt with in other classes as well, is that one of the obstacles to online education really working is the risk that in certain sort of versions of an online course, students can feel incredibly isolated. They don't have those accidental interactions that happen prior to class, after class, when you're in sort of a physical space. They can't catch the instructor as they're going down the hall on the way to class. And what we've increasingly learned is that these sort of moments of serendipity are in fact incredibly important. So I think, as Sonny alluded to, we need to create sort of those opportunities in the online space more clearly, because I think it is easy for individual students to feel isolated. And so when we think about the versions of active learning, for example, that we might do in the classroom in terms of breakout groups, etc., and what we're going to do online in Zoom in this session, those sorts of approaches are real opportunities, even in an online class, for students to really get to know each other and to really understand the viewpoint and the personality of the instructor as well as their classmates. And so I think one thing we need to be very thoughtful of is to realize that the risk of isolation is a real thing, and we need to think about that. But then at the same time, we do have a unique opportunity, and it's something that Harvard is spending a lot of time thinking about, with students scattered all over the place. Instead of that being a drawback, can that in fact be a serious advantage? Mm-hmm. Where all of a sudden now the perspectives, even the sort of data that you gather, that you can really bring to the classroom, can be from all over the place in the US and indeed all over the world. So instead of thinking that it's terrible that you're all scattered, the fact that you're scattered can in fact be leveraged. And so this is a part of really rethinking how that experience should be maximized and leveraged versus a problem that we need to mitigate.
If I can just tag on to that for 1 second, I think that's a really great point about how we can facilitate those interactions. And that was one of the biggest challenges that we had when we moved to online, in particular for international students who were, in Boston, right? Because, they felt very isolated. So we had to really innovate and think about ways to build those groups and those relationships. And to Sunny's point earlier, right, about globalization and education without borders, that's also one thing that this really enables and makes it a really exciting point, right? Because I think if there's nothing else that anybody, I mean, you can just look at the COVID-19 situation and realize what globalization looks like, right? And our industry, like everybody's industry, is global, and building a global network from your home even is so appealing to me and many that creates a great opportunity for our colleagues and the advancement of science in general in the future.
And to add on to that, I mean, I think what we're seeing here with the online or the shift to remote instruction is almost a new social construct in how people are interacting with one another. One of the things that we have found to be very successful, which we didn't do in the spring because of time constraints, but we've started to do in our summer courses now, is in the first few meetings in the online space, we talk about what we call netiquette. We tell them that, you know, this might feel a little awkward when you're in the breakout rooms. That's okay. You know, we sort of revisit the social side when we are inherently in a non-social situation talking to a computer. And our students have responded really well to that. And I think as we move forward, you know, now normalizing what a breakout room feels like to be, you know, somebody clicks a button and you are now in a room with 5 other people that you've never seen before. That's challenging for many, many people. And so I think just addressing that, acknowledging it, talking about video on versus video off and what that means. We've had great success with those discussions.
Yeah, and actually that's what we'll be doing after this session, and we're looking forward to that kind of interactivity. I guess, you know, one related question is just what about this broader paradigm shift and thinking about, again, I'll use the word intentional, thoughtful instructional design, thoughtful use of technology, how to engage and train faculty, whether they be full-time research active faculty or adjuncts, perspectives on that.
Yes, a great question.
One thing that I think we're
Rob, actually, could you do me a favor when you're giving your answer? I would love to hear your perspective on how we can really encourage faculty who are resistant to that kind of thing and how this might help us. I think because you had some really good insight into that last time we chatted, and that would be great to hear again.
So I think we're sort of facing a moment now where we really need to sort of restructure and be very clear on what we think is the evolving gold standard of teaching online. And it's not about the technology. It's really about the framework for the kinds of activities, the kinds of engagements, the modalities of assessment that we know in combination, we think work really well. There's actually quite a bit that we've learned from, you know, the massive open online course world, but even prior to that, there were online courses that were being done for credit, etc. So those learnings have to be surfaced and made apparent, and they have to be built into a framework of professional development for instructors. Because instructors need to understand how to combine these things, how to align them with objectives, what does assessment mean in this context, etc. And we need a lot more of sharing around that. I can't tell you the number of meetings I'm in where basically representatives from multiple universities are sweating over how to get faculty really ready for this. And so something that we've tried to do is not just basically the provision of resources for faculty to sort of look at, download, read about, etc. One thing we're trying to do now is to create almost course design or course building workshops that faculty in relatively small groups work together to literally build their courses together. I've been calling it sort of barn raising. Right, I love the notion of a whole community coming together and raising the barn. And that's what we're trying to do with, of course, people with a lot of expertise mixed into that, so that there's an opportunity for them to not just hear about it, not just look at it, but to actually do it. Because I think we have to escape the trap that there is simply a technological solution. It's like me saying that this piece of chalk or this PowerPoint program is going to make my class awesome. That's simply not going to happen, right? The tools mean nothing if you don't use them, not just properly, but also in a way that's integrated. And the last thing I'll say, it's not just the instructors, and this sort of riffs off of what Catherine was saying. The students need to understand what the expectations are, not just in terms of the netiquette, but really how do they think about the scheduling of their time when they're at home? How do they create that sort of rhythm of schedule? There's a lot that we're learning right now about what didn't work for students, and we now need to send that back to them so that they can understand, you know what? They know what to do when they come to class, and they know what to do when there's an assignment, when they're sort of on campus, but what do they do in this new world? And so I think there's a transparency both for instructors and learners and students that will be absolutely critical for this.
And can I just check onto that for one moment? I think to that point exactly, and beyond what we've been talking about, I think it's an important moment in higher education for us to really step back and look at how higher education can evolve to meet the demands of industry as well, right? I mean, I think that, you know, the online piece and the mixed modality is important. When I talk to industry, they're looking for skill-based credentialing, right? That's something I think that we should be thinking about and developing that, and how does that impact the online education, and putting together different credentials to make a pathway that really empowers the learner or the student, who is our customer at the end of the day, to really design the degree that fits their needs. And more often than not, students that I interact with sort of know what they want to do, and let's get them the skills that they need using the new modalities that we talked about. We're really pushing ourselves as higher educators to evolve the way that higher education has been delivered and thought about since the Middle Ages, and really push it to meet the need of the 21st century and where technology and the industries, all industries, just not ours, are going.
Right. Well, that's a great one. Maybe it's just one last quick theme. Skills-based credentialing, new types of credentials, weaving digital badges or certificates into the curriculum. You know, that's a hot topic associated with online education, and something that looks like it's well positioned in this kind of environment where, you know, they can be more affordable, they can be revised more quickly. Would anyone like to offer thoughts there? And then just in a couple moments, we're going to transition to the Q&A. I have some audience Q&A and then later a breakout, but new forms of credentials. What do you see emerging? Certifications you could put in there too. Are there ways that you've woven it into your curriculum, or do you see it standing in the future?
So I have to say, I'm a huge fan of what I think will be sort of a diversification of credentials in terms of their size and also how they relate to degrees. So don't get me wrong, it's not as if I'm saying that we no longer need degrees. I think there's a certain overall formative statement of who you are and what you've been through that a degree really expresses powerfully. But I think, you know, especially that we now live in a world where we're constantly changing careers and doing this shift and that shift, it's not as if we get a new degree necessarily every time. That this is an opportunity where your degrees are now layered, if you will, with, call them badges, micromasters, certificates, things that really speak to a more modular conception of not what you did 10 years ago, but what you did last month. Right? That gives a real-time sense of your evolution and your skill set. So I think they're going to be a critical part of the future.
Yep, they can be complements. And Sonny, I saw you nodding there. Could you just in
regard this area, like when I'm teaching a GLP course, and I'm been working with the Society of QA to generate some credits for our students. So I mean, working with professional society could be one way to maybe offer more of these credentials that is recognized by national societies. There's some benchmark to that. That's another way of turning some of the higher education courses to it. I think this could be a new way because also in the life science area, it's, I mean, one area I also want to talk about is more mentorships. I mean, invite a guest speaker. Nowadays, in the online platforms, you could have the global VP of a major pharma speaking from another continent, okay? So that also could improve the certification or accreditation of your program or your course that's more towards professional studies.
Great. Yeah, and that's a big topic for the future. It's something that I've had conversations with that my own research focuses on, and Mass Bioed and I have explored. And so stay tuned on that front.